The afternoon sun scorched the quiet village on the edge of the river. Inside a small bamboo house, a gray-haired grandmother sat weaving a mat, her wrinkled fingers moving with gentle patience. Then, a soft rustle came from outside. Something tiny moved among the fallen leaves near her doorstep. When she looked closer, she found a baby iguana, trembling, with dull green scales and frightened eyes. She smiled kindly and whispered, "Oh, poor little thing, you must be lost." She lifted it gently into her palms, feeling its cold, fragile body against her warm hands. She thought it was an iguana, small and harmless, just needing a home. She had no idea that this little creature would one day grow into something far larger, a creature wild and ancient, a monitor lizard, but in that moment, she only saw a life that needed love. The evening wind carried the scent of rain as the old woman closed her door. The baby iguana, thin, weak, and barely moving, rested in a small basket near the hearth. She placed a cloth over it and lit a small lamp, its glow flickering on her lined face. "Don't worry, little one," she murmured, stirring a pot of warm rice water. "You'll be safe here with me." The creature blinked its tiny golden eyes. The firelight reflected in them. It hissed faintly, more from fear than anger. The woman chuckled softly, her voice trembling with warmth. "You sound fierce, but you're too small to scare anyone." That night, the storm raged, but the little iguana slept, safe at last. Outside, thunder rolled over the river like a growl from the earth. The old woman lay awake, listening to the rain tapping her roof. In the dim light, the creature shifted, curling closer to the warmth of the fire. She smiled to herself, unaware of the secret nature of her new friend. Love had already begun to weave its quiet thread between them. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. The woman stepped outside, greeting the sunlight with tired eyes. When she returned, the little creature was already awake, perched on her mat. It watched her every move, cautious yet curious. She smiled. "You're not shy anymore, are you?" She placed a bit of banana in front of it. It sniffed, then licked it slowly. She clapped her hands, laughing like a child. "So you do eat fruit?" Her laughter echoed through the quiet house, a sound that hadn't been heard for years. She mused aloud. "I'll call you taro. You look like a taro root, green and stubborn." The lizard blinked once, as if approving. Days passed, and Taro began following her everywhere. Across the veranda, into the garden, even to the river's edge. Sometimes she talked to it as if it were human, telling stories of her late husband. And though it made no reply, it always listened. The villagers laughed softly at her, calling her the lizard lady. She didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't alone. Morning dew glistened on the vegetables as the grandmother bent to water her plants. Taro followed close behind, waddling awkwardly through the wet soil. Each time she pulled a weed, he tilted his head curiously, mimicking her rhythm. "You're quite the little helper," she chuckled, patting his scaly head. He blinked, slow and trusting, his tail flicking lazily in the sun. Days passed, and the garden flourished. She began to believe Taro brought her luck, that life had given her a gift. Even the birds stopped fearing him, landing on branches nearby as she worked. Sometimes she'd hum while he basked beside her feet, eyes half closed. Peace had returned to her lonely yard, but one afternoon, a neighbor screamed when she saw Taro near the fence. "He's not a pet, he's a monster," the woman cried, backing away. The grandmother frowned, hugging Taro close. "He's just a lizard, nothing more." Still, as the woman left, she noticed something. Taro's claws were getting longer, and his golden eyes seemed a little too knowing. Weeks turned into months, and Taro grew fast, too fast. His tail thickened, his legs stronger, his scales darker and rougher. When he stretched, he was nearly as long as the woman's arm. She stared one morning, surprised at how much he'd changed. "You've been eating well, haven't you, Taro?" He followed her to the river every morning, swimming with surprising grace. Children pointed from afar, whispering that he looked strange for an iguana. The grandmother only smiled proudly. "He's special," she said. She never noticed the faint ridge growing down his back, like a crown of thorns, or how fish scattered whenever he entered the water. One evening, she held him close by the fire. His scales glowed bronze under the flickering flame. "Promise me you'll stay with me, Taro," she whispered softly. He turned his head, pressing it gently against her palm. In that silent gesture, the promise was made. Rumors spread through the small riverside village. Children said they saw a creature in the reeds, green, long, and fierce. Men swore it wasn't an iguana at all, but a forest spirit's beast. Some wanted to kill it, others wanted to drive it away. The old woman, unaware, continued her quiet life. One evening, a villager came knocking, face pale with fear. "You should release it," he warned. "It's not what you think it is." But she only shook her head. "He's mine. He's kind." Her voice trembled, but her heart refused to believe otherwise. After all, Taro had never harmed anyone. That night, as the moon rose, she watched him sleeping. He was bigger now, his breathing deep and steady like the river itself. She touched his head, tracing the pattern of his scales. "Even if the world fears you," she whispered, "I won't." Outside, the wind rustled the bamboo like whispered prayers. It happened by accident. While feeding Taro a piece of boiled egg, her hand slipped. His sharp tooth grazed her finger. Just a scratch, but it bled. She gasped softly, and Taro froze, staring at the red droplet. Then, to her surprise, he pulled back, trembling as if ashamed. She washed the wound, smiling through the sting. "It's all right." But in his eyes, she saw confusion, almost guilt. From that day, he became gentler, always watching her hands carefully. He no longer ate until she stepped back. Their bond, strange and fragile, deepened through trust. The villagers, however, saw the bandage and whispered again. "He bit her," they said. "Next time it will be worse." She ignored them, her heart too full of stubborn love. "If he meant harm," she said softly, "I'd already be gone." And she stroked his head, as if soothing a frightened child. The rainy season came suddenly that year. The river swelled, dark and roaring, licking the roots of trees. Taro stood by the water's edge, tail flicking in agitation. The old woman called out, "Come inside, Taro!" But he stayed, watching something unseen beneath the surface. A loud crack split the air. Part of the riverbank gave way. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Taro lunged and caught her shawl in his teeth. With surprising strength, he pulled her back from the collapsing edge. She clung to him, gasping, heart pounding like thunder. He had saved her life. Later that night, as rain lashed against the roof, she wept softly. Her hands trembled as she held his head against her lap. "Thank you," she whispered over and over. Outside, lightning illuminated his large, muscular form. And in that flash, she saw not a pet, but a guardian. By the next morning, she couldn't ignore it anymore. Taro was enormous, his body sleek, his claws sharp, his tongue forked. She stared as he crawled past the doorframe, barely fitting through. He wasn't an iguana. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Her heart thudded as she whispered, "What are you, Taro?" He looked up, eyes glinting amber under the sun. There was no malice, only calm understanding. He approached slowly, pressing his snout to her knee. Her fear dissolved into sorrow and awe. "You've grown into something magnificent," she said, tears glistening. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring at the shadow of the massive reptile outside. His silhouette danced against the walls, ancient and majestic. In her heart, she accepted it. He was a monitor lizard, wild and free, but he had chosen to stay, and that was all that mattered. The villagers came again, this time with torches and sticks. They demanded she release the creature back to the forest. "He'll turn on you one day," they said. You can't tame what's wild." She stood at her gate, her frail body trembling, but her gaze was steady. "If you harm him," she said quietly, "you'll have to go through me." The crowd murmured, then dispersed slowly. Taro watched from behind her, tail still, breath heavy. When the last torch disappeared, she turned to him, exhausted. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "You belong to the wild." But Taro only lay down beside her feet, refusing to leave. She sighed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then stay," she said softly. "Stay as long as you can." The wind carried her words into the night like a vow. In the darkness, the great lizard's eyes glowed faintly gold. He stayed. Seasons changed, and the old woman grew slower. Her hair turned silver white, her hands thinner, her steps unsure. Taro, now the size of a man, followed her everywhere still. Through every dawn and every dusk, he never left her side. They were each other's shadow. Sometimes children would peek from the road, watching in silence. They saw an old woman feeding a creature as tall as her knees, and yet there was no fear in the scene, only quiet devotion. When she talked, he listened, eyes calm, patient, ancient. When she laughed, he lifted his head as if smiling too. At night, she would tell him stories of her youth, her family, her dreams. He'd rest his chin near her chair, eyes half-lidded, like a loyal guardian. "You're my blessing," she would whisper, brushing his scales. And though he could not answer, his heart seemed to understand. Theirs was a bond no words could define. The summer was harsher that year, the air dry and sharp. Grass crackled beneath every step, and the river sank lower each day. The old woman carried water from the well, her breath shallow from age. Tara walked beside her, tail sweeping dust into golden swirls. Even the birds seemed too tired to sing. One afternoon, smoke rose from the far side of the forest. A careless spark had grown into a crawling flame. The villagers ran with buckets, shouting, praying for rain. The woman looked toward her garden, her home, and her friend. "If it comes here," she whispered, "we'll face it together." Taro watched the horizon, his nostrils flaring. When the smoke thickened, he hissed, not in anger, but warning. He stood between her and the forest, his scales glinting in the firelight, and for the first time, she felt the raw power within him. He was no pet now. He was protector, fierce and unwavering. By nightfall, the flames reached the village edge. Men shouted, women carried water, children cried. The grandmother coughed as ash filled the air. Taro stood tall in front of her bamboo gate, tail lashing. When sparks flew near, he crushed them beneath his claws. Neighbors screamed, "Keep it away, it'll attack." But the lizard only roared at the flames, not the people. His movements were wild but precise, as though guided by instinct. He cleared debris, tail sweeping away burning straw. The fire avoided her home, curling aside like smoke before a god. When the storm of fire finally passed, her house still stood. Taro was covered in soot, eyes glowing faintly through the haze. She fell to her knees beside him, tears mixing with ash. "You saved me again," she whispered hoarsely. He lowered his head, breathing slow, steady, protective. The next morning, the village gathered, pointing at her gate. They saw the scorched ground, the deep claw marks in the dirt. "That thing is dangerous," a man said. "It's unnatural." Another added, "One day it'll destroy us all." The woman listened in silence, hand resting on Taro's head. "He saved my home," she said quietly, but their eyes were filled with fear, not gratitude. In their minds, fire and beast were the same, wild, untamed. And so, one by one, they turned away from her house. The loneliness returned, heavier than before. That night, she sat by the window, looking at the stars. "Taro," she whispered, "why does the world fear what it doesn't know?" The lizard lifted his head, eyes reflecting the moonlight. He blinked once, slowly, as though he understood. Her sadness eased. His presence was her answer. The village rebuilt, but no one visited her anymore. Children no longer came to listen to her stories. Even the market woman stopped leaving fruit at her gate. But she didn't mind. The forest and the river became her world again. And Taro, her constant companion. Years passed quietly, measured in soft sunsets and slow mornings. Her hair turned white, her back stooped, but her hands stayed gentle. She spoke less, smiled more, and learned to listen to silence. Sometimes she'd hum to Taro as he lay sunbathing. The tune was old, a lullaby from her childhood. She no longer feared death. It felt close, like a friend waiting patiently. But she worried what would happen to Taro when she was gone. "Promise me you'll survive," she said one evening. The great lizard flicked his tongue once, eyes glimmering gold. It was his wordless promise to the only human he'd ever loved. Her steps became slower with each dawn. The garden she once tended now grew wild, vines curling around bamboo. Taro often followed her, steadying her when she stumbled. His massive tail swept a path through overgrown grass. He had become her shadow, silent, steadfast, devoted. One morning, she fell near the water jar. Pain shot through her leg, and she could not stand. Taro approached, nudging her gently with his snout. She smiled weakly, whispering, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." But her body no longer obeyed her spirit. That night, she sat wrapped in her shawl by the fire, her breathing shallow, her eyes soft but weary. "Taro," she said softly, "you've grown so big, so strong." He rested his head in her lap, his eyes dim and sad. She stroked him slowly, as if memorizing his warmth. Dark clouds gathered again over the river valley. The sound of thunder echoed through the bamboo walls. Taro became restless, pacing near the window. The grandmother sat quietly, her hands trembling over her cup of tea. Her reflection in the liquid looked older than ever. When lightning struck nearby, Taro roared, a deep primal sound that shook the walls. The woman reached out, touching his snout. "It's all right, my dear." Her calm voice soothed him, but her own heart felt weak. The storm outside mirrored the one within her chest. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but she hadn't moved from her chair. Taro nudged her gently, confused when she didn't respond at first. Then she opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "Still here," she whispered. He lowered himself to the ground beside her feet, unwilling to leave. He could feel something changing, something final drawing near. For the first time in years, a villager knocked at her door. It was a young woman, carrying a small basket of rice. "I heard you've been unwell," she said shyly. "This is for you." The grandmother smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, child." The world still has kind hearts. The young woman glanced at Taro, eyes wide. "He's enormous," she whispered, trembling slightly. The grandmother chuckled softly. "He's gentle." "Don't be afraid." She patted Taro's back as if introducing an old friend. The visitor relaxed, realizing the bond between them was real. Before leaving, the girl turned back. "Some say he's a spirit protecting you," she said quietly. The grandmother smiled knowingly. "Perhaps he is." When the girl left, Taro rested beside her again. Maybe at last, the world was beginning to understand. When the festival came, lanterns floated over the river like tiny suns. The grandmother sat on her porch, a candle in her hand. "Taro," she said softly, "each lantern is a memory of those we love." She lit one and released it, watching it drift into the dusk. Its reflection shimmered across the ripples. Taro watched, eyes following the glowing trail. The light danced across his scales, turning him golden red. She whispered, "That one's for my husband. The next, for my parents." She paused, then smiled faintly. "And one day, someone will light one for me." The lizard's throat rumbled, low and mournful. When the last lantern disappeared beyond the bend, she sighed, Time moves like this river, doesn't it, Taro? He turned his head toward her, resting it against her knee. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. At least I won't drift alone. The stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter that night. Cold winds swept through the valley, harsher than ever before. The grandmother stayed wrapped in blankets, her fire burning low. Taro slept beside her bed, his tail curled protectively around her chair. She coughed often now, her voice fading to whispers, but she never once stopped speaking to him. "Remember the garden?" she said one night, smiling faintly. "It was green as hope. You were so small then?" Her eyes fluttered as if caught between dreams. He nudged her hand gently, his eyes soft and wet. "Don't be sad," she murmured. "You've been my greatest joy." Snow fell outside, rare and silent. Each flake landed softly on the window, melting like fleeting time. Taro lifted his head toward the cold glass, watching it with wonder. Then he turned back to her, listening to her slow breath. The warmth in the room began to fade, like a candle nearing its end. The wind whispered through bamboo leaves, tender and haunting. The grandmother's breathing was shallow, each exhale softer than before. She opened her eyes and found Taro still beside her. Her wrinkled hand trembled as she reached for his snout. "Good boy," she whispered. "You stayed." Her gaze drifted toward the river beyond the window. "I'll go where the lanterns go," she murmured faintly. Taro's head lowered, pressing against her hand as if pleading. She smiled one last time, her eyes clear and peaceful. "Don't forget me, my dear friend." The fire dimmed, shadows flickering gently across the walls. When the final ember went out, so did her breath. Taro lifted his head and gave a sound, half hiss, half cry. He curled beside her chair, unmoving, guarding her in silence. And outside, the wind carried her name into the trees. The morning came, but the house remained still. Smoke rose faintly from the cold hearth, curling into emptiness. The woman's chair sat unmoving, her blanket neatly folded. Only Taro breathed, slow and heavy beside her. The world outside went on, unaware that something sacred had ended. He nudged her one last time, gently, as if she might awaken. When she didn't, he lowered his head and stayed there for hours. The air was heavy with rain, though no clouds gathered above. Some said animals don't understand death. Taro proved them wrong. He refused food, refused rest, refused to leave her side. By sunset, he carried her shawl outside in his mouth. He laid it near the river where she once sang her lullabies. Then he sat beside it, motionless as stone. The current whispered softly, like her voice calling him home. That night, the stars wept quietly over the valley. Days turned into weeks. The house began to fade beneath dust and creeping vines. Villagers passed by, whispering of the old woman's passing, but none dared approach. The great lizard still guarded her porch. His eyes followed every stranger, not with anger, but loss. At dusk, he would walk to the river, dragging his tail through sand. He would stop at the same spot, stare at the ripples, and wait. Sometimes he let out a sound, low, trembling, almost human. The echo carried across the water like a mourning song. It was grief in its purest form, without words or tears. Children whispered that he was cursed. Elders said he was her spirit's guardian. But only Taro knew the truth. Love does not die with the body. It lingers, restless, searching for warmth in a cold world. And so he stayed, even as seasons changed. Rain leaked through the thatch roof, soaking the old floorboards. The wind carried dust and petals into the corners of the room. Taro often lay in the doorway, staring into the emptiness. He could still smell her faintly in the air, tea leaves, herbs, and smoke. Every scent was a memory he refused to let go. Sometimes he'd drag his heavy body through the house. Each creak of the floor sounded like a voice he longed to hear. He'd stop by the chair, lower his head, and rest. In his mind, she was still there, rocking gently, humming softly. His world was a shrine built of silence and devotion. Outside, vines claimed the garden, wrapping around old fences. Yet in one small corner, flowers still bloomed. It was where she had once planted jasmine with her hands. Taro would often lie beside them, careful not to crush them. Perhaps the earth itself remembered her tenderness. One afternoon, children followed him to the river. They hid behind trees, daring each other to get closer. When Taro dipped his head into the water, they gasped. "He's crying," one whispered. "See how the ripples move?" But none understood the ache beneath that stillness. A man later came with a spear saying, "The beast must go." The elders warned him, "Leave it. He guards her spirit." Still, greed and fear made him bold. He raised the spear as Taro lay in the sunlight. But when their eyes met, the man froze. There was no rage in those eyes, only sorrow and wisdom. The man lowered his weapon and turned away. That night, he told the villagers, "He's not a monster. He's mourning something we never could understand." From then on, they left Taro in peace. Spring returned, painting the valley in green and gold. Birds sang again, but the house by the river stayed quiet. Taro spent his days basking in sunlight, waiting for something unseen. Every rustle of bamboo made him lift his head. Perhaps he thought she might return in another form. Sometimes he saw her reflection in the water. Not real, but memory shimmering beneath the surface. He'd reach out his claw to touch it, disturbing the image. Then he'd stare at the ripples, watching them fade. Like life itself, fleeting, beautiful, gone too soon. The villagers began leaving food near the gate. They said it was an offering to the old spirit's friend. Taro never touched the food, but stayed near it. It was enough to know they remembered her too. Kindness at last was returning to the valley. One summer, a traveler stopped by the village. He was a young man with a journal and curious eyes. "Is it true?" he asked. "There's a guardian lizard by the river?" The villagers nodded, pointing toward the house. "Go with respect," they said. "That place is sacred." The traveler found Taro lying beside the jasmine. He watched quietly, sketching the great creature in his book. When he looked closer, he noticed the gentle way Taro breathed. It wasn't fearsome. It was heartbreak made flesh. He whispered, "You loved her, didn't you?" Taro turned his head slightly, as though he understood. The man placed a single flower near the gate and bowed. He didn't stay long, but his heart carried the story. That night, he wrote, "Even beasts can grieve, and in that grief, they become more human than we." And so, her memory spread beyond the valley. Taro began to dream more often. In his dreams, the old woman was always near the river. She called softly, her voice carried by the wind. He would follow, but always wake before reaching her. Each morning, he'd rise and search the shore again. One dawn, mist covered the valley like a blanket. Taro walked into it, tail cutting through dew and silence. He reached the same rock where she once washed clothes. He sat there for hours, eyes half closed, as if between worlds. Perhaps he was closer to her than ever before. The villagers saw him from afar and bowed their heads. They said the lizard guarded the bridge between life and death. Children began calling the river her spirit's path, and every dawn a thin fog would rise like breath. No one dared disturb that sacred hour. Years passed quietly until drought returned. The river shrank, the ground cracked, and fear returned to the villagers. One careless ember again sparked a blaze. Flames rushed toward the forest like hungry ghosts. The villagers panicked, running to the riverbank. Taro lifted his head as the smoke rose. Something ancient stirred within him. Memory, instinct, love. He moved toward the fire, slow but determined. His scales glowed like bronze under the inferno's light. To them, he looked like the spirit of the old woman herself. He swept burning branches aside, clearing paths for the fleeing. The villagers watched in awe, no longer afraid. When the fire finally died, Taro stood blackened and tired. He turned once toward the house, then toward the river. The people whispered, "He's guarding us still." Age came even for him, heavy and inevitable. His movements grew slower, his breath shallower. The villagers noticed and began visiting more often. They left water, flowers, and words of gratitude. He no longer hissed, he only blinked in quiet thanks. Children played near the gate now, laughing freely. Sometimes Taro would lift his head to watch them. Their joy reminded him of her, the laughter that once filled this home. He felt no loneliness anymore, only peace. The world had finally learned to love what it once fed. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley, he lay beside the jasmine once more. The scent wrapped around him like her embrace. He closed his eyes, listening to the river's lullaby, and he dreamed of the woman calling his name again. When dawn came, Taro did not rise. His great body lay still among the flowers, peaceful and grand. The villagers found him, their hearts heavy with both sorrow and awe. They did not bury him. They built a garden around him, and in the center, a small stone read, "Friend of the old woman, guardian of love." Seasons passed, but his legend grew. Travelers came to see the shrine by the river. Some claimed they saw his reflection move in the water. Others said the jasmine always bloomed brighter there. The air around it felt alive, warm, eternal. At night, when moonlight touched the water's edge, villagers said they heard two voices, one old and kind, one deep and ancient. They spoke not in words, but in harmony. The woman and her lizard, together again, beyond time. When dawn came, Taro did not rise. His great body lay still among the flowers, peaceful and grand. The villagers found him, their hearts heavy with both sorrow and awe. They did not bury him. They built a garden around him, and in the center, a small stone read, "Friend of the old woman, guardian of love." Seasons passed, but his legend grew. Travelers came to see the shrine by the river. Some claimed they saw his reflection move in the water. Others said the jasmine always bloomed brighter there. The air around it felt alive, warm, eternal. At night, when moonlight touched the water's edge, villagers said they heard two voices, one old and kind, one deep and ancient. They spoke not in words, but in harmony. The woman and her lizard, together again, beyond time. A young woman from the town took it upon herself to care for the shrine. She swept the leaves, tended the flowers, and lit candles every dusk. Though she never met the old woman, she felt her presence deeply. She often spoke aloud to the stone, as if someone listened. "Your love makes this place feel alive," she'd whisper. She began telling the story to travelers passing by. Some laughed, some wept, all left changed, because it wasn't a story about a monster, it was about devotion. A kind of love that bridges life and death, and the villagers began to cherish it anew. One night, the young woman dreamt of an old lady smiling at her. Beside her stood a great lizard with golden eyes. They said nothing, but their peace filled the dream. When she awoke, the candles were still burning bright. She smiled. "I'll keep your memory safe," she said. The river that once roared with floods now ran gentle and clear. Children fished from its banks, laughing freely. The villagers began calling it her river, a river of healing. They believed its waters carried blessings from the two souls, and every spring it shimmered like glass under sunlight. Elders poured water from it on newborns for good fortune. Travelers bathed their hands, whispering wishes. All who came felt calm, as if embraced by unseen warmth. Some even said the ripples formed shapes, an old woman's silhouette, and a long, graceful tail. When storms came, the river never overflowed again. It stayed calm, as though a guardian watched beneath the waves. And during the quiet hours before dawn, a faint hum echoed from the water's edge. The villagers bowed, saying, "They're still here." One autumn, a scholar arrived, drawn by the legend. He carried books, notes, and skepticism in equal measure. "I've heard of the spirit of the lizard," he said with a smirk, but stories often grow wild with age." The villagers only smiled. "Go see for yourself." He walked to the garden at sunset, notebook in hand. As he reached the stone, the air shifted, soft, fragrant. He felt warmth on his skin, though no sun remained. Then he heard something faint. A woman's hum, a deep rumble beside it. His pen trembled, his eyes filled with tears. He returned to town speechless, writing only one line. "Love once given never dies. It only changes form." His book would later inspire others to visit the valley, not for proof but for peace. The story had become truth again. To honor their memory, the village began a yearly festival. They called it the Day of Companions. Lanterns shaped like lizards and flowers floated down the river. Each light carried a prayer, a memory, or a thank you. The valley glowed with colors like scattered stars. Music played, soft flutes and bamboo drums echoing through dusk. Children danced, their laughter blending with the wind. At the river's bend, one large lantern drifted slower than the rest. It bore two painted figures, a woman and her lizard. The villagers bowed as it passed, silent and grateful, and as the lanterns faded into darkness, a warm breeze rose. The jasmine by the shrine bloomed all at once. People gasped, knowing what it meant. The old woman and Taro had joined them again, in spirit, watching, smiling, forever together. Decades later, a boy found an old photo in the abandoned house. It showed the gray-haired woman, smiling gently beside her mat. At her feet was a small creature, green, curious, and alert. He ran to show his grandmother, the keeper of the shrine. Her hands trembled as she held it. "So it was true," she whispered. The photo was framed and placed near the stone. Visitors came to see it, marveling at their bond. "Look at the way she smiles," said one, "and how it looks at her, not like a pet, but like family." The image became the heart of the story. At night, under the lantern glow, the photo shimmered faintly. The boy swore he saw the lizard blink once. His grandmother smiled knowingly. "They never left," she said. "They're just watching from the other side of the river." And the boy believed her completely. Time rolled forward, relentless yet kind. The village grew, houses replaced the bamboo huts. But the garden by the river was left untouched. Even the government declared it a protected site. They called it the Garden of Love and Memory. Scholars came, priests prayed, children still played. Some said they saw a large shadow under the water at night. It moved slowly, gracefully, never harming anyone. To the villagers, it was Taro, keeping watch. To others, it was nature itself, honoring devotion. One night, lightning split the sky and rain poured once again. The river swelled but did not flood. A calm voice seemed to whisper through the storm, "Don't be afraid, I'm still here." The next morning, the jasmine still stood unbroken. Generations later, the young woman's great-grandson returned. He had heard the story all his life, but never believed it. When he saw the garden, silence took his words away. The scent, the stillness, the air, it all felt alive. He knelt and whispered, "Now I understand." He rebuilt the small bamboo house in her honor, not as a home, but as a place for stories and peace. Visitors came to listen, to learn, to feel. The boy spoke her story, his voice trembling with pride. "This is not about a lizard," he'd say. "It's about love that never ends." At night, he left a candle by the jasmine bush. Its flame danced, but never went out. He swore he heard a soft hum from within the trees, a woman's voice, faint and kind, and the rustle of scales moving through the grass. Many years later, an old woman sat by that same river. Her hair was silver, her hands thin as paper. She had told this story her entire life, to travelers, to children, to anyone who would listen. "It began with a lost lizard," she always said. Her voice wavered, but her eyes still shone bright. Those who listened wept softly, not from sadness, but wonder, for she told it not as legend, but as truth. "The river remembers," she whispered, "and so must we." That night, she finished her tale and fell asleep by the water. When villagers found her, she was smiling. A single jasmine flower rested on her chest. Beside her footprints, 2 trails led into the river, one human, one reptilian, but neither came back. At dawn, the valley glowed with golden mist, the river shimmered, calm as glass, and for a heartbeat, 2 figures stood there again, a woman in white, gentle as morning, and beside her, a great monitor lizard, proud and eternal. They walked toward the forest's edge together. Each step was a memory, each glance a farewell. At the tree line, they turned once more to look back. The air shimmered. Then they were gone. Only the jasmine remained, blooming brighter than ever. Now, when the wind moves through that valley, listen closely. You'll hear a hum and a deep, soft rumble intertwined. A song of devotion born from 2 different hearts. The woman and her lizard, bound beyond death. He stayed, and in that staying, love became immortal.